create special resources for those systems. And then as we've talked about inflow and prevention, now we want to really look at what are, if we are actually, if we actually believe this idea that things tie back to racism, what does it mean to actually tackle housing within that framework versus just only as a dedicated piece? I think the two reasons people would typically consider ballot measures and why you might consider one is either to play defense and reform harmful systems and practices, or to play offense in terms of investment. This kind of does both at the same time, with eligible uses and then prohibiting those same dollars from going to carceral systems and law enforcement agencies. And critically, in terms of what philanthropy, why I think this should excite all of us in terms of truly broad coalitions that this forges, which presents counter coalition to really existing power bases, like some of the questions that came earlier. So ingredients, timing, framework, relationships, a courageous champion. If you're looking to do a ballot measure, it's not rocket science, but these are all the things you need. I often speak of a microwave when I talk about anything like this. We've done 3 now, H, Triple H, and now this will be J. And in all of those, when people ask how we did, I would say it's always based on a lot of things that have happened and then kind of sudden movement when the opportunity presents itself. There's no substitute for it. If you think about a microwave, you've got to put something in there that has things already ready to go. So there are no shortcuts. There are things that kind of bring things together much more quickly, but there really aren't shortcuts to that work. And particularly, I would say, on the matter of relationships and how important those are, which I'll speak to in a second. So these are the 3 things in LA that I'd say for at least the last 5 years, we've started looking at prevention as a conversation. And the criminal justice reform work has really taken off in terms of, the schools to prisons pipeline, um, jobs not jails, housing not cages. That work has really taken off over the last 5 years, and this really builds on the base of that. And of course, none of this would really be possible, to be honest, in terms of even our situation, but for the tremendous work done by Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives in terms of the coalition of Black and Brown serving organizations that really came to a head this summer. So all of those lent the way for this. So in terms of our work, again, I think as we're looking at the lack of general fund resources that went to this, we have, if you look in your community, the criminal justice reform work will probably have been so fruitful that there's probably plans around it. In most communities, these have advanced to the point of plans, but I would almost guarantee you that those plans, the funding for those plans have probably fallen woefully short, or are only funded by special resources like AB 109 money versus a significant chunk of the general fund budget. And of course, if you think about this, we all know the number within homelessness. We look at that overrepresentation, but also looking at what that represents in jail. Just Black people in LA County jails and who are using our jails as a mental health institution, 41%. If you look at arrests and inmates within jail, I mean, arrests and the jail population for Black and Brown residents hover between 70 and 80%, which is unbelievable. So all of this started when you think about the tail, and so this is where timing and relationships come into place. And again, there's really no substitute for either. Timing, this all kind of started in June, coming back from one of the rallies locally. And this, one of the rallies was happening on the date that our home walk, which is our local fundraiser in LA, should have happened. And I saw all these people, 10,000 people, which is the number of people that would have been at our home walk. With some of them with signs about housing for all. And it really stuck out to me that you had a self-organized rally of people calling for the very things we've been trying to get people to think and care about. And what did we need to do to really forge the intersection of those two things? So in terms of relationships, I happen to be in a cohort through the Durfee Foundation through a fellowship with the EVP of Community Coalition, which is the group Karen Bass founded, a traditional base building electoral politics group, and also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, and went to them just privately and said, want to do something intersectional, really under the banner of racial justice, but we are new to the game. If you want to do it, um, or if you think it's something that could be helpful, we are happy to join in the fight, but really want to take your lead as people have done this for far longer than we have. Their excitement, their kind of support, and their vision for it really led to us starting this work in July. So years of work prior to this, and even Patrisse would say, we would not be here at the People's Budget Moment without the 10 years of work that it took to get here. But all of that work kind of jumping off in a sudden moment. If you're looking how that practically turns into then finding an electoral champion, I'd say these are all the documents and all of the things that it takes to do that. What you see in that, the less time you have, the more you will have to do, or the more the group you will be funding will have to do. In terms of what you might be funding, these are the things you might be funding for a group to be ready to do at any time. So a one pager, a draft, literal draft of the actual motion, ordinance, or amendment at the state level. You know, I know Housing California has written lots of trailer bill language, for example. Polling a path to victory, you have to literally show who's going to be in support of this, who will be in turnout of those things, and also a budget and legal opinion. So we had political attorneys who are the outside counsel for the county, also produce an opinion for us in terms of the legality of the thing. The reason those are so critical is that sometimes them requesting that through the official channels leads to all sorts of new conversations and dramatic new opposition coming out. So the more you can equip basic things beforehand to let the champion that you choose, in our case, our courageous champion was Supervisor Sheila Kuehl and Hilda Solis, really take the lead. All of those things are critical. And all of those things, for us, that first month of activity costs us over $100,000, probably $100,000 to $150,000 without staff time. So the polling and all those pieces take real money. And we had also lending our social media arm with Swell to do some of the blasting and to create a website, because nothing's real until you create a website. So all those things do take real working capital in terms of your investment and a backbone to have that to jump off with. I'm gonna skip through these because I don't think these are as important for this conversation, and we'll send out the deck so that you have them. I think this is just for generally, just so when you think about your communities, words matter. So what you see here is that while there is less support for a straight out defund message, and even less support for a defund and give money to over police communities, there is a lot of support for the general idea of shifting funding from law enforcement to community-based programming. And even the word of law enforcement generally versus getting into specific departments, you also see that that matters in terms of point differential. Over policing, when we're in focus groups, the reason that was less support, people literally just didn't understand what over police meant. So general education that takes people places to go. This slide I want to show you just to show that we are in a moment, thankfully, where you can say all that, and talking about Black and Brown communities in particular does not necessarily diminish in a dramatic measure kind of the potency of it. And the overall top line, when we talk about racial justice, our measure actually did better than one about just income inequality. You see here tremendous support for general specific programs. So the more we talk about specifics, the more support we always know there is. Want to share with you some quick insights from working with new criminal justice partners, because I really believe and I want this to be the future for our collective work together. I'm excited that we generally are talking about broadening coalitions, but I think there is a world beyond even just the traditional social service world that we really want to make sure we branch out into, and many of you on the call have been doing just that. So excited to join that work. I think the first one is merge and yield. I think in realizing when I was talking to a lot of racial justice advocates and talking to them to say, hey, what's something that you're worried that I don't understand and you're worried about people who are typically not in this work getting into this work? They're like, especially when time is short, you want people making the decisions who have been in this a long time because the nuances matter and the nuances take a lot of time to develop. And so for us, we had to balance, and I think I would say you would have to continue balancing. I think there's right now we all recognize um, current relationships that you have. I think there's a growing appreciation for respecting long-lasting Black and Brown-led organizations. I think it's a balance because of bullet three, because of the undercapacity. It is a balance between resourcing current administrative backbone organizations to lead certain work in terms of polling, meeting facilitation, some general things, but really placing decision making into the front seat. That also doesn't mean not suggesting certain things, but really laying out all the information you have and then letting others make the decision about it. Um, Within that, I would say something we were really pleasantly surprised by is that there is such a pro-housing orientation within the world of criminal justice advocates, reform advocates. In the HCI world, so many, even in housing and homelessness, even as we grapple and struggle to have more leaders with lived experience, I would say it is almost more generally the trend that people within the CJ world have lived experience, are typically led by Black and Brown leaders, are typically led by people who have houselessness in their history. It's not what they lead with, but many times you find out it's part of their story. So built in, they have this pro-housing orientation, and even without us being adversarial, I think it's been interesting looking at this coalition that a lot of the housing advocates have some degree of fear of going into a broadened coalition and broad-based work, wondering if we'll get to keep our slice of the pie. I would say there's a built-in appreciation for housing in the CJ world in a way that even with youth development and jobs, I think it can get messy, and I acknowledge that. But I think within the CJ world, a lot of the work is helping them get out of jails that are serving as shelters and getting into real housing. So there really is this natural alignment that I think we should be excited by. The multifaceted coalition, I would say, even as you do that though, please understand that it is not a monolithic group. I think I was surprised about how fragile some of the working relationships are. If you are familiar with the housing ready and treatment first versus housing first models, I would say the CJ world between the abolitionists and the reformers is just as intense, if not more. And I think that's something to understand and respect as you help hold space for new coalitions, to not assume your favorite CJ group that you may know about is best friends with the other ATI group. Oftentimes there's a lot of history, just the same as it would be in our world too, that we need to go into eyes wide open. And I would say on the capacity within that, part of the difference is a lot of these new movement orgs, a lot of the momentum organizing groups are very different than base building electoral long-standing politics groups. So there is a built-in division right now, which I do think part of what we can do is hold space to form a new coalition that really brings both together. So it really is about understanding some of the rich diversity within this new group of advocates that we're going into, which is part of why we had to build such a multifaceted coalition, to have a campaign committee, a steering committee, and a broader coalition to respect some of those ways to stitch together some different relationships and some difficult relationships and give them a place to work together. So this is a steering committee different than our campaign committee, which is a little more protected in terms of decision making, again, at the request of some of our leads. And then the broader coalition that paints more of the traditional pictures that we know of. In terms of the campaign budget, I would be remiss, even as we talk about the future of what funders, private funders can do, I would be remiss to point out that we don't get there without actually passing this thing. And because we jumped in so late, there's a couple dynamics in this election, which may be true for a couple more elections, which is that it is heavier on mail. I think when you're looking at advocacy, it's easy to want all of the exciting digital and on the street work seem powerful, but like electoral politics with likely voters is such a different ball game, much more heavily reliant on mail. So when you get into the actual voting turnout time, it takes a lot of money because stamps unfortunately still cost what they do. Shortened timeline now that it's all mail, vote by mail, and ballots are going out, voter guides are going out. It is a really truncated timeline, and more as we get into this work, I think we collectively have been used to bipartisan supported efforts around housing. This is something where there is real opposition. We are encountering serious spending. We've been sued already and challenged in many ways. So it takes real resources, which is why I'd say in LA we're looking at $5 to $7 million. Just appreciating funders like CZI and Liberty Hill who are considering direct campaign investments. Again, critically important, and I do think this is something relevant to the state because the reason that these groups are spending so much against this is that they really do see this as precedent setting for the state and for the nation. Seeing that charter reform as a way to affect budgets is potentially a game changer. So if this passes, we've already gotten one court ruling to uphold it. The first lawsuit we just passed through last week, so we're upholding that. Or we are continuing on to the ballot, and I'm sure there will be more challenges. But if we can make it through and continue to go through, this will represent a game-changing amount of investment on a local level that the state law for charters in California, at least, would allow other local communities to do the same. So I think we would welcome support from all around California. If you're funding in different parts, I think your support would be much appreciated in passing this so that we can set an example for other areas. Here's a different breakdown and how this all comes together. And I would say in terms of the phases here, you know, we are through the prepare and pressure part. We are now on the ballot. So in terms of the dollars that I think funders can look at, certainly in terms of passage, and then in terms of planning, and in terms of then there's an equal amount of funding after this passes that's needed to build the coalition. Part of what's so exciting, we intentionally just decided not to pre-allocate a certain amount of money to say, how do we want to use $1 billion a year at the intersection of all these issues? Public money has the potential to draw new groups together. It also has potential to tear groups apart. And we think philanthropic money is the glue and the difference between those two outcomes. So I think, again, we don't get there without the direct campaign investment now, which, to be honest, we're scrambling a bit for, given how short we jumped into this. But even after that fact, if you can't do this, there will be time on the back end. So on the left side, you'll see private family foundations, what y'all can do. If you're a community foundation, what you can do. In the middle, some things that cross over in terms of things that would have effect both on the campaign and the implementation. And then before the campaign and after the campaign, that's what those lines represent. So I will end with this, just to thank you all in advance, just for the lessons we'll learn together and for your support that you've shared or you're considering. But again, even if you're a private foundation, there's so much you can do in terms of your own board and things that you might not be able to do officially, corporately, but things that your connected networks can do. And this is information in terms of how to get connected. Emily on our team, our director of strategic investments, is on the call. But more than anything, we really wanted to share some of our early lessons with you because we really do feel like this is something that can be replicated and we can all continue to learn from. especially diving deeper into what we are all learning about, what fundamentally drives homelessness in our state. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Lauren. Lauren, I think it might just be me, but for some reason you're not showing as muted, but it is muting.
It's not just you.
1 second.
Yes.
How is this?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging with me throughout my internet issues today. They're doing construction work and they broke my line, so my neighbor is gracious enough to let me use her dining table. But thank you so much, Chris, for walking us through that. And I think that that's really the important piece, is how something really innovative like this can also be implemented in communities, not just within California, but also across the state. And I think there's a really big opportunity there. We do have a few questions. So Kristen, I see that you have your hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you and see if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, Chris. Good to see you. And I really appreciated your presentation, particularly that new partners slide. I know that you've shared different ways foundations can be supportive in terms of research, all that, but I think they'll be grasping to the idea of a strong intermediary like the United Way. But I'd like you to tease that out more as an institution where United Way can be deemed to have a white supremacy culture, as many foundations do. And what did it take for United Way Home for Good to be prepared to this idea of yielding to other organizations? Because again, foundations might grasp to fund intermediaries, but not ask the right questions of those intermediaries to be ready for this type of coalition work.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, I think part of what was interesting was going into it. I think what it took us having a conversation with people who are critically involved, like our marketing team, our CEO, our board chair, and other people saying, look, we're about to jump into this. I want to lay out the rules here, the way we're going to jump in. We're going to jump in and we're going to aim for the Victory Day celebration to feature and be led by other organizations, even if you may feel like we're doing a lot of the work or the fundraising. So it took getting sign off from the very beginning to say, we are not going to go into this to seek credit. That might look a little different in LA's case, just because even though we just tried to stay behind the scenes, the sheriff used the United Way. They brought them to light. Our supervisor kept bringing us to light as a way to discredit the work. So we haven't been able to stay in the shadows as much as we'd like, but at least in terms of credit, it took us getting clear and explicit sign off from the beginning. But with that, I think it took us committing to doing the work. So I think for groups attempting to be allies, it's also not just, hey, let me show up with a great idea and ask you to take over. I think we kept making multiple offers to say, look, we want this to be led by you whenever you feel ready for that and whenever you feel excited by the idea. We will stop. It took us giving them veto authority. So when I talked to Patrice and Aurea, it was like, hey, if you want us to stop, we are going to stop. If you want to lead this, we would love for you to lead it. If you're saying you don't have capacity but want us to lead a few more steps, we'll continue to do that. And there was a point in which a lot of our leaders became excited and then trusted that this could be theirs and then asked for it then. So I think it also takes knowing that in new partnerships and new work like that, it may take a little bit of time. So just because you've asked or offered once, you shouldn't stop having that posture throughout. So merge and yield doesn't necessarily look like fully yielding or immediately yielding per se, but I think it's having that posture from beginning to end.
Thanks so much, Chris. Bill, I think you had a question as well.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So I put it in the chat. It's basically kind of one of your lessons, and thanks for sharing those emerging lessons. But it's about kind of balancing what I call the inside strategy and the outside strategies, and knowing your work well enough that you guys have pretty much operate on inside strategies, working with policy folks, kind of in the, allies in the systems. This is pretty different in terms of, it seems to me, in terms of working with outside pressure and organizing. And so I'm just curious, if that's influencing how you look at your work more generally. A lot of philanthropy does take more of an inside, although plenty of funders and increasingly are supporting organizing. So I'm just curious if you have any reflections how this might affect your work more broadly.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely made us appreciate outside work more, although, I mean, that was partly where we're leaning with everyone in when we were launching that in recognition. But I would say it's made us appreciate, I think, the intersection of the outside game and advocacy, and also the lived experience and lived expertise value that I think we're all starting to have, is just the community-based solution part. So I think that we're trying to center in our work more. I think my broad, simple answer would be, the bigger the idea that you're attempting to do, the more the outside forces you'll need, because they represent more and more of the electorate you're trying to do or to engage and work with. And they're setting the culture and the tone that makes the inside work possible. I think moving forward, it's kind of a blend. I think, I guess my answer for all of us would be to get rid of a little bit of the binary and try to see where those have to merge, because I think we continue to see that. It's like, you need the base to turn out 3,000 letters. You also need the relationship with the supervisor and their chief of staff and their deputies in order to even get the thing introduced. Just the pressure alone, we just saw in Sacramento, tremendous bills get crushed and killed because we are missing that actual relationship, longstanding, with local advocates around police reform. So I think the blending of the two we're seeing, and especially going forward, I think something I would encourage funders to do is equipping the outside game momentum movement politics groups, invest in their capacity to develop their inside game. I would say, that's how I would also frame it, is that a lot of them are not playing the outside game because they don't want to play the inside game. They're playing the outside game because they've been locked out of the inside game. And Justice LA, which is a group that we've worked with, and certainly the Movement for Black Lives, has been really smart about the inside game, and they actually play both incredibly well in terms of the compromise, the relationship, the push-pull, the celebration, and the challenging. But I think equipping long-standing outside groups to develop the capacity to do real policy analysis, to develop relationships with elected offices, to understand voter bases and electoral politics are so critical in helping outside groups exercise even more power than they've built up already. And I think the existing intermediary groups can be kind of, a helpful bridge to get there. But of course, I think the outcome is helping those voices actually lead. I think the other question between Kristen and Bill is about the role of intermediaries, because the justice world can be fractured. I think a particularly interesting dynamic that we observed is we had people from either group asking us to hold space so that it wouldn't be dominated by the opposite group. So I think in classic form, also helping maybe a new intermediary emerge, but holding that space as an intermediary in the meantime without a predetermined solution as to who will hold that space on the other side of things.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So I just want to open it up again, see if folks want to take themselves off mute, ask Chris your questions. In the meantime, I do apologize. We had such a robust conversation, a really great conversation, that we're not going to have time for breakouts, but I think that is a-okay because, like I said, the conversation here has been really, really good, and I think we have a lot to fall back on. One more call for questions before I close us out here in a little bit.
And maybe, Lauren, since we're not doing breakouts, maybe even if you don't have a question, but you have a comment or an idea that I can learn from, I would love to hear the thing that's been in your mind that you feel like I missed.
That's right. Chris is here to learn too. not just this week. All right, going once, going twice.
Evans, I have a quick question. So I think just wondering about what process will be put in place to actually like you're going to pass, so I'm going to start there. To think about how funds will be allocated once the measure passes. Is that going to be done with this existing steering committee group or the bigger group, or is there going to be something new that's going to be put in place to make those decisions and provide oversight, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did get a clause in there about a transparent and inclusive process. Of course, that means nothing without actual commitment or investment into how robust that process can be. So I do think that's the kind of thing private funders, regardless of wherever your ballot measure language lands, I think to make it real, I think that's something funders can really invest in to make that real. And certainly all parties involved will take as much planning, infrastructure, and process as they can. So right now that will look like for this, it will look like we have a policy subcommittee within our steering committee led by Community Coalition, the Advancement Project, and Justice LA folks and several others who are going to look at, are there motions that we need to pass even on the way to November to help set guardrails and to bring that part of the language to life. Just because once it passes, it will become a lot of even the labor groups who might be opposed will start flipping in terms of their positioning to start really getting after this money. So I think that we are inviting them into this work, the labor unions, but also trying to set some baseline motions to outline that process now. It is intentionally a 3-year process. Again, it borrows from the framework of in LA, we have something called Care First, Jails Last. So it builds on a deep process that already had specific budget recommendations, but in terms of bringing that to life, it will attempt to bring together all of the different sides and have a separate and dedicated planning process. What that exactly looks like, again, will depend on the amount of investment we have to flesh that out. So it's not predetermined yet. The other thing I'll say in terms of if you're considering this in your communities, the maintenance of effort clause was also a critical thing that we got in there. We have no supplantation language, so the existing work that is going toward these eligible uses will not count toward the 10%, which will be critical.
Great, thank you so much. So we are at time, and as I close this out, I would really love for everyone in the chat box just to put one takeaway or one thing you've learned or one thing you want to bring back to your organization from the conversations we've had today. You could just type that out. That's helpful for us to know where we can inform our future programming, but also see your peers and see how they're taking and digesting this information. One takeaway for me was there's a lot of talk about narrative change and narrative research, which is amazing because we're in the midst of planning a narrative research webinar coming up on October 13th, and I hope we'll have that up on our programming page soon, so you can sign up there. And I obviously will be sure to include a link in any follow-up emails that we have and invite you all to that conversation. Really excited. It's going to be a landscape of all the various narrative research projects that are out there right now. How do we as funders operationalize that? And then how can we also build communications capacity amongst organizations to really implement that? So again, thank you, Chris. Thank you to all of our other speakers, and thank you to all of our participants for your grace and patience as I navigate some internet issues. It wouldn't be 2020 without something like that happening, I guess. But thank you again for all your time today, and I really look forward to connecting with you all soon. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.